AITA for charging my roommate half of the grocery bill. She started eating more of my groceries than I did, so I want to charge her more but she doesn't want to pay. I am 22 years old, and I have been living with my roommate, Jessica, who is 23, for almost 6 months now. When we first moved in together, everything seemed really promising. We sat down, discussed house rules, made plans, and one of the agreements we came to was that we would split the grocery bill 50-50. It sounded simple enough at the time. We would go grocery shopping together, plan meals together, and overall, it felt very fair. At the beginning, it worked perfectly. We would make a little event out of grocery shopping, usually going on Saturday mornings. We would both contribute ideas about what to buy, and if one of us wanted something extra that the other person did not like, we would just pick it up separately on our own tab. It felt equal. I honestly thought we had cracked the roommate code. However, after a couple of months, Jessica gradually stopped coming with me. The first few times, she had reasonable excuses. She would say she had a lot of work to do or she was feeling under the weather. I did not mind covering for her at first, because life gets busy and tiring, and honestly, I thought she would come next time. But next time never really came. Every week, it was another excuse. She was tired, she was stressed, she was hungover, she had errands she forgot about, she just was not in the mood. Every time I suggested we go together, she would just brush it off with some excuse and tell me to just pick up whatever I thought we needed. So, I kept doing the shopping. I would go out alone, spend an hour wandering the aisles trying to remember everything we were running low on, and haul it all back home by myself. I made sure to buy staples we both liked: bread, eggs, milk, cheese, pasta, fruits, vegetables, cereal, you name it. I even made an effort to pick up snacks that she liked, just to be considerate. I never really bought anything wildly personal or extravagant. But then I started noticing something that really annoyed me. Jessica was eating way more of the groceries than I was. And not just a little more. I would come home from work or class and find an entire box of cheese crackers I had barely touched already gone. I would buy a liter of orange juice, open it to pour one glass, and come back the next day to find it half empty. I would get excited about cooking a meal only to realize that the ingredients I had bought for it had already been eaten or opened. It started feeling less like we were sharing groceries and more like I was her personal grocery delivery service. At first, I tried to be understanding. Maybe she was just hungrier some days, maybe she was stressed and stress eating. But the pattern kept repeating. I would spend my money and my time shopping, only to watch Jessica tear through everything without a second thought, while I was left trying to stretch whatever scraps were left. Finally, I decided that this was not sustainable, and I asked her to pay me for half of the grocery bill. I showed her the receipts, explained that I had been buying enough for both of us, and pointed out that she was eating more than her fair share anyway. To my relief, she agreed without much fuss. I thought that was the end of it. It was not. Very quickly after that, Jessica started complaining. She would grumble that I was buying stuff only I liked, and that she was being forced to pay for things she did not even want to eat. She would nitpick the receipts, questioning every little purchase. If I bought almond milk instead of regular milk, she would roll her eyes and say she did not even drink that. If I picked up a certain brand of cereal, she would whine that she did not like it, even though she would be the one to finish the entire box within a few days. It got to the point where I dreaded even bringing up groceries, because it would inevitably lead to some passive-aggressive comment from her about how she was paying for my weird food. I reminded her, over and over again, that she was always welcome to come shopping with me and pick out whatever she wanted. I even suggested that she make a list for me if she could not come. I said she could add anything she liked to the cart. Every single time, she brushed me off. She was too tired, too busy, too overwhelmed, too uninterested. It was not that she did not have the opportunity. She just did not care enough to put in any effort. After a while, I got really frustrated. If she was eating more than me and refusing to help shop or plan meals, why should we still be splitting the bill evenly? It felt unfair that I was doing all the work, fronting the costs, and ending up with less food in the end. So I sat her down again and told her that I thought it would be fairer if she paid a little more, given that she was eating significantly more than I was. I said I was happy to keep shopping and doing the work, but I could not afford to keep subsidizing her appetite while getting nothing in return. Jessica did not take it well at all. She immediately got defensive and called the idea absurd. She said that it was ridiculous to expect her to pay more just because she happened to be hungrier sometimes. She insisted that groceries were groceries and that unless I was planning to label every single item with my name, we should just keep splitting it evenly. She made me feel like I was being greedy or unreasonable, even though I was just asking for fairness. Since then, the atmosphere in our apartment has been tense. I feel like I am constantly walking on eggshells. I have started buying my own separate groceries and labeling them, which makes me feel petty, but I honestly do not see another way to protect my own food and budget. Jessica still raids the communal stuff and still makes little jabs about how I am so uptight about food now. I honestly do not know if I handled this the right way. Part of me feels guilty for bringing money into it, because I hate conflict. But another part of me feels really resentful that she expected me to do all the work, spend all the money, and just accept it without saying anything. I am exhausted by the whole situation. So I guess the question is, am I the bad guy for asking her to pay more, considering she eats way more and does not contribute to shopping? Or was I right to stand up for myself, even if it made things uncomfortable between us? Update 1. After Jessica refused to pay more and called my suggestion absurd, I realized that if I wanted to survive living with her without losing my sanity, or my wallet, I needed to act more officially. No more vague conversations, no more casual agreements that she would just find loopholes around. If she wanted to treat our arrangement like a business transaction only when it suited her, then fine. I could be professional too. The next time we started running low on groceries, I sat down with a notepad and carefully made a list of everything we usually needed. I divided the list into 3 neat categories: my products, the things I personally wanted and knew she would not touch, like my almond milk, my granola, my special yogurt; her products, things she specifically loved and would consume entirely on her own, like her favorite spicy chips and those overpriced bottled smoothies she always craved; and shared things, the basics we both used, like bread, eggs, pasta, milk, basic fruits and vegetables. I spent a long time thinking through this division, making sure it was fair, making sure there was nothing that could be twisted into me being selfish or unreasonable. When the weekend came, I set out to the supermarket, list in hand. I spent hours there. I walked up and down every aisle, carefully choosing the best deals, checking expiry dates, comparing brands, making sure I was buying quality stuff without overspending. It was exhausting. I had 2 full carts by the time I was done, and dragging all those bags across town was a nightmare. The bus was crowded, the weather was humid, and by the time I finally got home, I was sweaty, tired, and honestly feeling pretty resentful. But I was determined to be thorough. After putting all the groceries away, I sat down at the kitchen table with my laptop, a calculator, and a fresh notebook. I manually drew up a detailed breakdown of everything I had bought. I wrote down each item, its exact price, and which category it belonged to. I calculated Jessica's share based on what she would personally consume, plus half of the shared items. To that, I added a small, very reasonable surcharge labeled selection and logistics fee, because frankly, spending over 2 hours hunting for her favorite brands and carrying 15 heavy bags home absolutely counted as labor. I also included a modest delivery surcharge, since if she had ordered delivery, she would have been charged for it anyway. When I was finished, the document was several pages long. I printed it out and highlighted her total in bright yellow, just to make things as simple and clear as possible. I took a deep breath and went to find her. Jessica was lying on the couch scrolling through her phone when I handed her the printout. I explained as calmly as I could that since she had refused to shop or even make a list, this system was the fairest solution. She only had to pay for what she would actually consume, plus a small compensation for my time and effort. I thought it was more than fair. I genuinely believed I was going out of my way to be reasonable. Jessica stared at the paper for about 2 seconds before rolling her eyes so hard I thought she might actually sprain something. Without even reading it, she started shouting that I was exaggerating, and that she did not sign up for such accounting. She accused me of being controlling and said that roommates should not be nickel-and-diming each other over groceries. I tried to explain that it was not about the money, it was about the principle, but she was not listening. Her voice got louder and louder, and she kept ranting about how unfair it was that she was expected to live under a dictatorship over a carton of milk. Then, in one sudden, childish move, she crumpled up the detailed check I had spent hours working on and threw it straight into my face. Before I could even react, she stormed off into her bedroom, slamming the door so hard behind her that one of my favorite glass vases, a gift from my grandmother, rattled off the living room shelf and smashed into pieces on the floor. I stood there in the middle of the living room, surrounded by shards of glass and crumpled paper, feeling completely drained. I had tried so hard to be fair. I had tried to be patient, to be considerate, to find a solution that respected both of our needs. I had spent my entire weekend doing the shopping, making careful lists, and trying to prevent exactly this kind of conflict. And all it had gotten me was broken glass, a screaming roommate, and a new level of tension in the apartment that made it feel less like a home and more like a battlefield. I cleaned up the broken vase in silence, listening to Jessica blasting music behind her closed door, obviously doing everything she could to ignore me. I could not believe how wildly out of proportion her reaction had been. All I had wanted was some acknowledgement of the time, effort, and money I was investing into keeping both of us fed. I sat down at the kitchen table again, staring at the blank space where my vase used to sit, and for the first time since moving in with Jessica, I seriously started thinking about whether I could actually keep living like this. I felt sad and a little angry because I was trying to be as honest as possible. Update 2. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual, not because of my alarm, but because I heard the refrigerator door opening and closing over and over again with an impatient clatter. At first, I tried to ignore it, rolling over in bed and pulling the blanket over my head, but the sound persisted, loud and jarring in the otherwise still apartment. Still groggy and bleary-eyed, I sat up, rubbed my face, and shuffled toward my bedroom door. I opened it just a crack, moving slowly so the door hinge would not squeak and alert her to my presence. Standing there in the kitchen, framed by the pale blue morning light streaming in through the small window, was Jessica. She was barefoot, her hair a tangled mess, wearing wrinkled pajamas that looked like she had slept in them for days. She stood with the refrigerator door wide open, one hand propping it up lazily, the other rifling through the shelves like she was digging for treasure. She moved slowly, almost aimlessly, pulling out containers, peering into them, shoving them back in frustration. I watched as her hand finally settled on the very yogurt I had just bought for myself the day before, the one I had picked out carefully because it was a rare treat I had been looking forward to. Without so much as a glance around, without a shred of hesitation, Jessica peeled back the foil lid, scooped out a heaping spoonful, and began eating right there in front of the open fridge. It was as if nothing had changed. As if the conversations, the arguments, the tension, the crumpled receipts meant nothing. As if she still believed everything in the apartment was hers by default. There was something so casual, so entitled about the way she stood there, barefoot and blank-faced, eating my yogurt in the cold light of morning, that something deep inside me cracked. I stepped out into the hallway, my footsteps sharp against the wooden floor. Jessica barely reacted. I walked straight over to her, reached out, and without raising my voice or making a scene, took the yogurt container right out of her hand. For a moment, she just stared at me, stunned, the spoon still suspended midair. Her face shifted quickly, the confusion giving way to indignation, her mouth tightening into a sour frown. I told her, as calmly and firmly as I could, that from now on, all the food in the apartment was mine until she either paid her share of the groceries or went out and bought her own. There would be no more free rides. No more silent allowances. No more acting like my efforts and money were an endless resource for her to dip into whenever she pleased. Jessica's reaction was instantaneous. She tossed the spoon into the sink with a clatter and immediately launched into a protest, her voice climbing higher with every word. She accused me of behaving very greedily, of being selfish over a couple of stupid groceries. She ranted that normal roommates did not treat each other this way, that in other apartments people shared food without turning it into a courtroom drama. She pointed out that she already paid half the rent and half the utilities, and now I was mocking her and trying to humiliate her over a few pathetic products that, according to her, did not even cost that much. I stood still, hands at my sides, refusing to let her shouting shake me. I kept my expression neutral, letting her vent, letting her drown in her own noise. When she finally ran out of steam, panting slightly from the effort of her own indignation, I repeated, without any anger, without any debate, that she could either pay what she owed or buy herself food. The choice was hers. Nothing else needed to be said. Jessica made a loud, exaggerated huff and rolled her eyes with such force it looked almost painful. She stomped past me, her shoulder brushing mine a little too hard to be accidental, and disappeared into her room, slamming the door behind her with a thunderous bang that made the walls vibrate. I stood there for a moment longer, listening as she immediately started throwing things around inside, slamming drawers, knocking over something heavy, muttering angrily under her breath loud enough for me to hear through the thin walls. I felt a flicker of sadness, but also a strange sense of peace. I had finally drawn a line, and I was not going to erase it just because she was throwing a tantrum. The rest of the day was a quiet, bitter war zone. Jessica made it a personal mission to make her displeasure known. Every time she passed me in the hallway or the kitchen, she would let out loud, theatrical sighs, mutter sharp little insults under her breath, and shoot me glares so icy they could have frozen the air between us. She slammed cabinet doors with enough force to make the dishes rattle. She stomped through the apartment like an angry storm cloud. It was exhausting, but I refused to engage. I stayed calm. I stayed focused. I went about my work at the kitchen table, sipping my coffee, reading emails, pretending her petty dramatics were nothing but background noise. It soon became painfully obvious that Jessica had not thought any of this through. She had not bought herself any groceries. She had no backup plan. Throughout the day, I caught glimpses of her wandering the kitchen like a restless ghost, opening cabinet after cabinet, peering into empty boxes, rummaging through drawers that had nothing but utensils in them. She opened the fridge multiple times, each time staring into it as if expecting food to magically appear between blinks. She even crouched down and opened the freezer at one point, standing there for several minutes, hoping there might be some forgotten treasure hidden behind the frozen peas. But there was nothing. Everything was either labeled clearly with my name or had been bought exclusively for me. I watched her frustration grow with each failed search. By evening, hunger had clearly gnawed away at her pride. She sat hunched over on the couch, scrolling through her phone furiously. After a few minutes, she stood up abruptly, marched into the kitchen, and ordered herself a pizza through the delivery app. I sat quietly at the table, pretending to focus on my laptop, while out of the corner of my eye, I saw the details of her order flash across the screen. It was a large pizza, extra toppings, breadsticks on the side, a feast clearly meant to fill the growing pit in her stomach. She spent the next half hour pacing around her room, fiddling with her phone, fluffing the couch cushions, doing everything but preparing to answer the door. When the doorbell finally rang, sharp and clear through the apartment, I froze where I sat, waiting to see what she would do. Jessica did absolutely nothing. She did not get up. She did not even lift her head. She just stayed sprawled out on her bed, eyes glued to her phone, deliberately ignoring the delivery man who was patiently ringing again, knocking on the door, trying to get her attention. I sat in stunned silence as the minutes dragged on. Eventually, the knocking stopped. I heard the faint sound of retreating footsteps, then the low hum of a car engine as the delivery guy drove away. Jessica had sabotaged herself out of pure, stubborn spite. She had gone through the trouble of ordering food, waited for it, and then refused to claim it, all because admitting defeat, even in something as small as this, was apparently too high a price for her pride. The apartment settled into a thick, heavy silence for the rest of the evening, broken only by the occasional creak of the floorboards as I moved quietly around. Jessica remained locked in her room, the light under her door a pale strip of defiance. Sitting alone at the kitchen table, eating the simple dinner I had cooked with the groceries I had bought with my own money, I realized something with cold clarity. Jessica was not just stubborn. She was prepared to dig her heels in so deeply that she would suffer rather than admit she had been wrong. She would rather starve, rather endure discomfort, rather turn our living situation into a slow, miserable standoff, than accept that she had been unfair to me. She would rather not even eat for a while, just to not admit that she was wrong. Update 3. On the third day after our standoff had begun, I came home from a long day of studying, feeling drained in that bone-deep way that only back-to-back lectures and endless assignments can cause. I was not expecting anything different from the usual cold silence that had settled over the apartment, so when I walked into my room and saw something new on my desk, it immediately caught my attention. There, neatly placed in the very center of the desk, was a folded bill and a small scrap of paper. It was not a clean, casual placement. The edges of the bill were pressed down like someone had folded it with a kind of angry precision, and the note looked like it had been torn hastily from a larger sheet of paper. I picked up the note first. The handwriting was familiar, but the letters were jagged and uneven, written in a heavy, frustrated scrawl that looked like the pen had almost torn through the paper. It read, "Here's your money. Now give me my yogurt, monster." I stood there for a moment, just absorbing the ridiculousness of it all. The resentment practically dripped from the note, each letter trembling with unspoken fury. It was so dramatic, so childishly angry, that I could not help but smile a little to myself. It was obvious Jessica had written it in a state of extreme resentment, every loop and slash of the pen screaming her irritation. Curious, I unfolded the bill and checked the amount. To my surprise, she had paid exactly the amount I had originally written out on the detailed check. Every item, every surcharge, accounted for down to the cent. Not only that, but she had even left a few dollars extra, a deliberate move, no doubt meant to showcase her greatness and imply that she was being somehow magnanimous, rising above the situation while still getting the last word. It was such a classic Jessica move that I almost laughed out loud. I gathered up the groceries she had originally claimed as hers, a couple of yogurts, some chips, a pack of cookies she loved, and a few snack bars, and placed them carefully in a small grocery bag. Then, still smiling a little to myself, I brought the bag to her door, gave a quick knock, and left it there without waiting for any more drama. That evening, something unexpected happened. We both ended up sitting at the kitchen table, eating our respective meals in complete silence. Not the cold, angry silence that had filled the apartment for days, but a softer, more neutral quiet. A kind of peace that neither of us dared to break. There was no bickering, no passive-aggressive muttering, no loud sighs or slamming of drawers. Just two tired people, chewing their food, each lost in their own thoughts, coexisting without conflict for the first time in what felt like months. It was oddly comforting. I realized that in all the time we had lived together, real silence, the kind that was simply the absence of noise and not the presence of anger, had been almost non-existent. We had either been talking, arguing, or pointedly ignoring each other with loud gestures. But this silence was different. It was natural. It was a truce without words. After that evening, something shifted between us. It was not dramatic or sudden, but it was real. We sat down and established a clear new rule: each of us would buy her own groceries. No more communal shopping, no more silent assumptions that the other would cover anything. If one of us wanted something that belonged to the other, even just a splash of milk or a slice of bread, we had to ask first. No exceptions. No automatic reaching into each other's food supplies. No matter how small or insignificant the item seemed, permission was now mandatory. Jessica, of course, could not completely let it go without a few passive-aggressive scenes. A couple of times she would sigh loudly and comment that food brings people together, shooting me a look like I was personally responsible for destroying the sisterhood of womanhood over a carton of yogurt. Another time she muttered something under her breath about how roommates were supposed to share things, like families. But each time, I would calmly remind her of the rule. No arguments. No emotions. Just a quiet, firm reminder. Eventually, even she seemed to realize that it was not worth the energy. After a few reminders, she stopped trying to test the boundary. With the new system in place, our living situation gradually became easier, smoother, lighter. There were no more silent battles over the fridge. No more hidden resentment simmering under every interaction. No more finding empty boxes in the pantry that someone had finished without telling the other. Now, if she wanted snacks, she bought her own. If I needed coffee, I made sure it was mine. It was simple. Clear. Respectful. Surprisingly, as the resentment drained away, we started getting along better than we ever had before. Without the constant undercurrent of food-related tension, our real personalities had room to breathe. We started hanging out again in the evenings, watching TV shows together on the worn-out couch. We each had our own bowls of popcorn, carefully bought and prepared separately, but somehow eating side by side felt more communal than any forced sharing ever had. We laughed at stupid shows, shared recommendations, teased each other lightly without it turning into a fight. It turned out that setting boundaries, real, firm, unapologetic boundaries, did not kill the friendship we had. It actually saved it. Once we both knew exactly what was expected, once the lines were drawn and respected, everything else became easier. There was no more guessing, no more seething, no more scorekeeping. Just two people, learning how to live side by side without stepping all over each other. Now, sitting there in the evenings with my own bowl of popcorn and my own groceries safely tucked away in the fridge, I could finally relax. No resentment. No tension. Just peace. It turns out that once you set boundaries, everything becomes much easier.